Eventually I end up just putting the Amelia in the Earhart. Hey everybody, as promised, I wanted to share with you my top 8 matches from the Exalts League tournament. We're going in as the first seed, but it's a single elimination tournament, so if we lose, we're out. But we're not gonna let that happen. Our first opponent is Nahmaa. Each competitor brings 3 decks with different heroes, and you get to ban one of your opponent's decks before the match. I brought Sigismar and Wingspan, Teija and Nauraa, and Sierra and Oddball, and Sigismar was banned. Nahmaa brought Sigismar and Wingspan, Kojo and Buddha, and Sierra and Oddball, and I banned Sigismar as well. We'll play best of 3, and you have to win a game with each of your unbanned heroes to win the match. I hope you can enjoy watching these competitive games from my perspective. I'll do my best to explain what I was thinking and share why I made the plays I did. I'm pretty happy to queue into Kojo and Buddha here with Teija and Nauraa. I feel like this is a pretty good matchup. I don't really need the Spindle Bastion in this matchup. It is really annoying when they have Intimidation, but since they only have like one card that it can really prevent, I think it's just better to focus on our main game plan. I also usually put Nurture in the mana because it's only really good later on when you already have some anchored characters sticking around from the previous turn or you have like more mana to work with. So that was pretty obvious to get rid of. Looking at this hand, since we're going first, we'll probably just want to play like a really big character and force them to just trade lanes with us. Looking at the stats, since Daughter of Yggdrasil has a 3 in water and so does Yong-Su, they'll both be pretty much the same. And so I don't want to play Daughter of Yggdrasil on the first turn and give our opponent a draw. We want to like wait as long as possible to give them those extra resources and save Daughter of Yggdrasil for when the stats can be more impressive. So I'll probably just lead out with Yong-Su here because the best they can do at that point is match it, and I'm sure they'd rather just trade lanes than have neither of us advance. I end up keeping Parvati too because like there's a 50% chance depending on what they advance into that her stats will be relevant in all of the regions, and at that point it's pretty much as strong as the Tree Man, and if we can get Parvati into the reserve for 3 cost, it'll be like really strong later. So yeah, as I said, I just play Yong-Su here because I don't really have like a lot of plans to get a ton of value out of it yet, and it's basically as strong as Daughter of Yggdrasil without having to give our opponent those extra resources up front. With the Isimboshi, they're able to take a lane, and this works out pretty well for them because they also have that option now to get rid of it from the reserve for a buff, so it gives them a lot of flexibility on their next turn, but we're still feeling fine. They did advance into a region with just water and forest on the right, which means that our Parvati could be a pretty good play this next turn. Beauty Sleep's a really good draw. It's actually like one of the cards where when I get it, I'll basically just like hold on to it all game because especially in like a matchup like this where we both play like similar cost cards, it can be a really good way to just like steal that extra lane and take the win at the end. As long as I have a decent amount of cards in my hand, I'll definitely like hold that and avoid putting it in the mana. This Hatter here is pretty good for them because we're not in water on the left, so it completely blocks us. It's interesting, it's kind of like an alternative to Jhin where instead of having a little bit of extra power each turn with that extra mana, you can just have like one really big strong turn with like a huge anchored character, so definitely a trade-off. Here I just play the Parvati. Now that they're out of mana, I don't have to worry about an Intimidation, and that can leave us with an anchored character going into the next turn. Since they're not advancing on the right, it'll still be completely blocking them, so this play feels really good. With that, we're tied up now. They have a lot of strong zero cost effects in their reserve, but we have this extra character on the board, so things are feeling pretty neck and neck. We haven't really drawn any of our cheap characters without seeing Sneaser Shroom or Spindle Harvester, so it's going to make it a little hard for us to play our turn slowly. Looking at this hand, I feel like the best thing we could really do is just drop Tree Man and hope they don't have an Intimidation. Since we already have a 4-static character sticking around from the previous turn, it'll be pretty hard for them to beat us on both sides, especially since Kojo's not going first. So I feel like this is a pretty comfortable turn where we can drop Tree Man without worrying, and then that can set us up to have some extra value going into our next turn. It is possible to play Daughter of Yggdrasil here and hope we draw into a cheaper card, but because that's unreliable and it won't leave us any value sticking around going into the next day, I don't think it's really worth it. So as I said previously, I just play the Tree Man here. It's a little unfortunate because if they do play a character here and anchor it, we won't be able to use the Beauty Sleep because we'll probably have to like pass our turn before we get that opportunity. Usually that's a pretty good counter to things with anchored because they're going to be sticking around anyway. But yeah, that's going to be off the table. Probably like the worst case scenario here would be if they play Haven Warrior and buff it with Isimboshi to beat us on one side, and then they could play the Intimidation and return a character to our hand so that we lose in both lanes and they get an anchored character sticking around. But that would require a pretty specific set of cards, so yeah, it's unlikely that they'll be able to pull that off. Nahmaa does lead off with the Haven Warrior here, which is a little frightening, but It's on the side with our tree man, and if he was going to be returning one of our characters to our hand this turn, I don't think he'd want to return the one that isn't anchored. So yeah, I think this is a little bit of a tell that he doesn't have the intimidation, which means we'll probably just be trading lanes, and even if he anchors this Haven Warrior, we'll only be behind 1 in stats going into the next day. I think about using Beauty Sleep here for a little bit, but if I do, there's no reason for them to anchor the character, so it's definitely not worthwhile. In the future, it'd be good to pass a little quicker. I hope I didn't give Nahmaa too much information. This anchor here is expected, and there's no reason for them to play another card because they can't really change the way the progression's gonna go. It is interesting because I'm not really used to anchored in Kojo decks, and so this kind of puts us in an awkward spot because they're actually ahead on the left, and then they're gonna get the Buddha token on the right as well. So we're gonna have to work to be able to trade lanes this turn. Another Yong-Su is a little surprising. We definitely like to see some more plants, but it would be possible to play Daughter of Yggdrasil here and have 2 plants and play Yong-Su. I think though it'll be a little better if I can get something anchored to stick around into the next turn. And honestly, keeping 2 Yong-Su gives us the least options, so I end up throwing the second one in the mana. While it is a good card, if we time it right, Daughter of Yggdrasil can be just as strong without having to have as many requirements, so I'm happy with what we have in hand. A 1-drop would be perfect to fill out this curve, but instead we'll probably just end up playing 2 3-drops this turn. Parvati's especially good, and we'll want to wait as long as possible to play her so that we can make it less likely that they'll be able to use Intimidation. The Sabotage gets rid of our power play, but it means they're putting less stats on the board, which will make it a little easier for us to trade lanes. We're only 3 behind now on the left and 2 on the right, and if we do this right, we could maybe even take both expeditions. I'll play the Daughter here first so that I can have 2 plants out for Yong-Su. It honestly doesn't really matter that much which side we put it on because they're in water on both sides, and on both sides we're in mountain, so it's going to be pretty much the same. I end up playing it on the left where we'll be only up 1 in water. This does make it so that if they have Isenboshi, they can beat us out on the left, so maybe it would have been better to put this Daughter on the right. I was thinking about a lot here though, and I'm not 100% sure which would be the best play. They have a Ratatosker, which lets them pass priority to us. At this point, I'm definitely worried about something like a Tracer, but if I play Yong-Su on the right side, the worst that can happen is we trade lanes. Without anything anchored, we're not going to have an advantage going into the next day, and we're also going to have to discard something from the reserve. But at this point, if they want to take either side, they'll have to play another card from their hand, which means that they'll be discarding 1 or 2 resources from the reserve as well. This Tracer gets them a win, but it is going to make them pretty low on resources. They only have 1 card in their hand to R3, so that's at least a little bit of an advantage. These draws are alright. Druid's a little slow this late in the game, but the second Beauty Sleep is well appreciated. We're getting pretty close to the final turns here, and with 2 of those, I might be able to sneak out a pretty cheeky win. I think I end up putting the second Tree Man in the mana. At this point, it's pretty unlikely I'd play both the rest of this game, and Daughter of Yggdrasil is a lot higher priority for them to sabotage, so I don't think I'm worried about losing the option to play the Tree Man from the reserve. It'd be nice to have a couple cheap characters right now to play our turn more slowly, and it would also be good in case they do have something like Intimidation so that we'll still have a presence on the board. Playing just like a Tree Man and the 3-drop is going to leave us pretty exposed, but if this Tree Man does stick around, it'll create a lot of good value. I play the Tree Man on the left because it doesn't really care about region types, and Daughter of Yggdrasil will be a lot stronger on the right. If we can get away with it, it would be nice to play the Druid on the right instead, but I think we're going to need the extra stats to guarantee that we advance this round. Leading out with the Haven Bouncer doesn't really give us any extra information. They still have 4 mana, which means they could be playing a couple other cards, so I want to get ahead on both sides. In this position, the worst that could happen is they take 1 lane and we don't take either, but most often we'll just be trading here. And with that, now we're just praying they don't have Intimidation again, but they don't, which puts us in a perfect position going into the final rounds with 2 Beauty Sleep to hopefully be able to just take this game right here and now. It is going to be them going first, which gives us more time to play the Beauty Sleeps and be reactive, but they will have the extra Buddha token we have to worry about. Thankfully, our Tree Man, though, can kind of offset us, giving us those extra stats on the left. My heart sank a little with these draws. With only 1 character, we can still push the right, but it'll be a lot harder than if we had a lot of good, cheap characters to play this turn. We have this full hand, but no matter what we do, we'll be pretty exposed to them using something like Intimidation on our Tree Man. We know they didn't have it last turn though, so let's hope they didn't draw it. I don't really care about the meditation training at this point, because I'm just hoping to take the game this turn. Nurture's nice because it can let us play our turn pretty slow, and we'll be able to be really reactive and see what they do before we have to commit any Beauty Sleeps. If we end up not being able to win this day, it would be best not to sleep anything of theirs so that we can have both of them for the next round and just finish things out then. But depending on what they do, the physical training will be nice as well, and we can use it to get a little bit more stats on one side, while Nurture would push both expeditions. That Sun Wukong is interesting because it's definitely doing a lot better job of blocking us than helping them advance. At this point, we're able to completely block them by playing the Moon Druid, which is definitely a nice trade, our 3 mana for their 3. It is a little worrisome though, because with the 4th of stats in Mountain, we'll have to use a Beauty Sleep on it if we want to advance at this point. And so if they play too many other big characters, it might be hard to sleep all of them. Now with just 1 card left in hand for them, I kind of want to force that out before I commit a sleep. If they play the card from the reserve, they'll be out of mana, and if they play a card from the hand, they won't be able to afford the card in the reserve anymore either. So they're going to be down to their last play. I use physical training because we don't really need to slow things down anymore with nurture, and it'll really help us push the right side, which is the only place they've committed. Even if they have an intimidation, we'll still be able to take one side. It would be a little bit unfortunate though if they return the Tree Man, because we don't have anything cheap that we can play to still take the Hero Expedition, and we can't buff our character on the right enough to win. But with that Tracer, we can actually double advance this round. Their weakest mountain stats are 2 and 3, and since we already have 6 in mountain, we'll be able to slide in just above them once we sleep the Sun Wukong and the Haven Warrior. And with that, we'll be taking game 1 of the match. Now we only have to win with Sierra and Oddball, and our opponent still has to win with Kojo and Buddha and their Sierra and Oddball. It was a little tricky without getting some of the characters we'd like to see in our hand, but we were still able to make it work. Going into game 2, Nahmaa decided to stay on Kojo and Buddha, which I'm pretty happy about because I feel good about this matchup. We'll never really need 2 Brass Bug hubs, so I put 1 in the mana. Having Hive already is nice, so we'll definitely want to keep the Engineer so that we can try and cheat out the Hive on 5. Without Amelia Earhart, Keylon Elemental isn't that strong. I'm afraid I'll get low on resources, so I'm a lot more comfortable just playing something like Inari turn 1. I'm afraid that I won't even be able to take 1 lane if I try and play the hub this turn, so I end up just throwing that in the mana so that I can keep the Inari for the better stats up front to try and make sure we can trade early on and not get behind, and also have the combo to be able to get Hive out on 5 and make winning the match a little easier. Right now I have to choose if I want to play on the left or the right. If I play on the left, it opens it up for them having more 1-drops that can make them double advance, while if I play on the right, it could put us in a scenario where we aren't advancing at all. But either way, if they do have the right 1-drop, they'll be getting 1 advancement ahead of us, and I'd rather slow down the game and give us more time to get things like our Hives out. So I choose to go on the right so that if they have something with only 1 in stats all the way across the board, they won't be able to double advance, and we can slow things down and give us more time to set up. Isenboshi would be good regardless, but this does play around some of the potential 1-drops. But they don't have anything, and with that, we're going to be able to trade early, which is pretty strong against Kojo and Buddha. At this point now, going into turn 4, they're not going to be getting a free Buddha token, and things will be going pretty smoothly from here. Optimally, I'd like to be able to keep this Inari around to be able to use its discard from reserve effect on our Hive around turn 5, but that might be a little greedy. To do so, I'd have to play Amelia Earhart this turn and the Engineer, which isn't a lot of stats on the board. We are enforced on both sides, which is going to make it hard for them to block us with their card in the reserve, but I still think that might be a little greedy. Eventually, I end up just putting the Amelia in the Earhart, so that worst case scenario, I can at least play like 3 cards this turn and have a lot more time to be reactive and better stats to be able to contest them. It would be great if they play something here like Mighty Jin. Since we're in water on both sides, we'd be able to double advance, which would be pretty awesome. Right now, I lead out with the Mechanic. I just realized I've been calling it Engineer. Excuse me, yeah, it's the Mechanic, but I know I want to get that into the reserve, and if I end up not having to play all of my resources this turn, I want to make sure at least that one gets on the board. It's not Mighty Jin, but the Hatter again, which is pretty weak, giving the same result where we can advance on both sides. They're able to set up that future anchored character, but I honestly don't know if it's worth it. It's going to put a lot less pressure on us and make it easier for us to play our big permanents later on. We do have to discard something here, and the Inari and Mechanic are going to be super effective with this Hive next turn, so that makes the decision easy. With so few resources though, we're going to be pretty open to sabotage. If they get rid of our Mechanic, we're going to be pretty much stuck with whatever card we drew next turn and didn't put in the mana to make it through the day. I do think though that having the Inari in the reserve is worth wasting that resource last turn to double advance. We could have played the Inari instead and had another card in hand, but being able to get a potential free Brass Bug and maybe even win on both sides is worthwhile. There aren't any turn timers here, and Nahmaa really took a long time to figure out what to put in the mana. It definitely makes me curious about what they'll be playing this turn. Looking at this hand, Axion Scrambler seems kinda nice to be able to get rid of a resource and prevent them from using that Hatter for anchored, but if we do play it, it'll be the only thing we're using on the turn. At this point, I know that I want to be playing the Brass Bug Hive this turn, but in the worst case scenario, they might sabotage us, so I want to think about my plays if that happens. I could keep the Scrambler as a pretty strong way to put 4 on the right and get rid of their Hatter so they can't anchor something, but at that point, if it's the only character they play, I'd be afraid that they might be able to double advance. So I think the stronger play is to keep the removal spell. Worst case scenario, we might have to play it and Inari, but that will make it so we don't get behind in progression. And best case scenario, we still play the Hive this turn, and then they end up anchoring something later on in the game and we'll have a way to remove it. They do have this Sabotage, which is kind of frustrating, but I'm really glad that I kept the card I did because of that. For a while here, I almost think about just passing completely so that I can play the Hive next turn and use Inari on it, but I end up not making that play because at this point we already have a 1 advancement lead, and so if we can trade lanes and hold on to that, I'll be feeling a lot better instead of trying to play catch up. If we put the Inari on either side, we'll be guaranteed to be able to take that lane because even if they play another character, we can just remove one of them with our spell. And physical training sets them up here, but the Keylon Burst is the ultimate answer. It'd be nice if we could use this after they'd already anchored the character, but even so, at this point it's going to make it so they have 4 cards in the reserve, so they're going to be running out of resources, and the best thing they can do is anchor the Buddha. Nahmaa chooses to do that, which makes sense, but we're happy to keep the lead and be able to play Hive for sure next turn with 6 mana. Since I'm low on resources here, I honestly just want to keep the most expensive card. Most of the time I want to split my Brass Bugs and put 1 on each side to pressure both lanes, but since they're starting out ahead by 2 on the right, I'm pretty worried that they'll be able to take both expeditions. So to avoid that, I just put both of the bugs on the left, and then they have to work pretty hard to block us, and especially with them having Pathfinder in the reserve, I think this makes it a lot more likely that we'll be able to advance. A lot of their characters that can block us in Mountain and Forest don't have a water stat as well, which is pretty nice. Things like the Hatter and Mighty Djinn that would be pretty good here won't help them advance. This is making things pretty awkward for them. But they end up having this Tracer, which has a 4 stat, so they're actually able to double advance, and suddenly we're behind. Most often there, I feel like they would have just blocked us and advanced once, but yeah, being able to get that double advance is really strong. Keylon Elemental doesn't really have any synergy with these cards, so we're going to be putting that in the mana. Also, 3 and 4 is perfect to fill out our mana curve. I started out with my bug on the right because I feel like we'll be able to put out a lot of stats this day, and so I'm not that worried. Now that they've gotten out of water though, this Mighty Djinn is going to be really good. But with a Sabotage, they're only going to be able to play 1 more card this turn. I think about it for a minute and I decide to play the Scrambler to the left. It might make it so that we can double advance this day. Depending on what they have, if they're really banking on being able to play that card from the reserve, they might just have something like a 1-drop. And since we're already ahead on the right, if they play something there to beat us out, we might be able to play Foundry Armor on the left to win on that side, and then be able to put the bug on the right and possibly win or at least block them as well. Playing on the left definitely keeps our options open here too, because if we put our character on the right and they put it something else on the left, we're not going to be able to block it with Foundry Armor alone. But yeah, now because of that Sabotage, they're not going to be able to use their last 2 mana, and it is just an Isenboshi, which doesn't help at all because they're not in water on either side, but I guess they want to get it in the reserve. It feels a little wasteful here to use the Foundry Armorer because we don't need the Brass Bug, but yeah, we definitely want to take both lanes and regain our lead. We only have to win on one side now and be able to take this game. I'm not surprised they don't put the Djinn in the mana. It'll be really strong in the companion expedition and they're really low on resources. Getting the second Hive here is honestly a little awkward. I would have much preferred to get a 2-drop so that I could play 3 cards this turn and really slow play things and see what they do. It would be great if we go to tiebreakers, but I want to end things before that. Our 2 options now are to play the second Hive, which would give us 8 worth of stats, which is pretty strong, or we could play our 2 3-drops, which can give us 4 in Mountain and then 5 in any of the regions. So it is slightly better stat-wise to play the 2 3-drops, but I end up deciding that I just want to play the Hive here and I put the pigs in the mana. I think it's very unlikely that they'll be able to stop us with the cards at their disposal. If we put all of our pressure on the left side, their Mighty Djinn's going to be completely ineffective at stopping us, and then the worst that could happen is we'll advance once and then they'll double advance, at which point we'll have 2 Hives going into the tiebreaker, and more likely than not, I don't think they'll be able to beat us on both sides here. If they want to stop us in water, they'd have to probably use their Isenboshi, but then that won't be blocking us in the Mountain, and so it seems pretty difficult for them to compile 11 worth of stats for both of the regions. And even if they do magically block us, I highly doubt they'd be advancing on the right, and it'll be a lot easier for us to win this game moving forward since we have double Hive. And Nahmaa knows it. Playing the Mighty Djinn to the right is GG. He'll advance once and we'll be taking the second game and winning the match, which means we'll be moving forward into the top 4. I'm really hoping at this point that I can go all the way. If you enjoy these kind of gameplay reviews, make sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel. I'll be sharing my deck list and come back to see the top 4 match as well. Thanks for watching.